Sister Wives star Janelle Brown has put forward an interesting viewpoint. She feels that if polygamy ever became legalized in the United States, it would actually discourage men from practicing it. Hello, friends. Welcome back to my channel. Let's get right into it. Now, polygamy has always been a contentious, hot topic in American society. And if there's one family that's put this lifestyle in the national limelight, it's the Browns on TLC's Sister Wives. Over the years, audiences have come to know each of the wives in their own unique way. But among them, Janelle has differentiated herself as down-to-earth, practical, and refreshingly honest. She's not one to sugarcoat. When discussing her experience of polygamy, she tells it like it is, both the bad and the good and everything in between. Recently, she caused quite a stir with a comment that's drawn ire from fans and even reality TV pundits. She asserted that if polygamy was somehow legalized, it would not lead to a stampede of men queuing up to take multiple wives. Rather, she believes many of them would head in the opposite direction. At first blush, that may seem counterintuitive. Surely, the conventional thinking goes, plenty of men would clamor for it if only it were made legal. But Janelle's argument cuts deeper. She knows that the reality of plural marriage is ever so much more complex than the fantasy. Mutual family life, emotional highs and lows, legal responsibilities, and the constant logistics, those very things rather quickly dispel the glittering romantic notion people may have. And if you've been watching the Browns for the last 10 years, you likely know that her opinion isn't theoretical, it's experiential. Janelle Brown, from reality TV to polygamy commentator, to truly understand Janelle's perspective, let's get a brief glimpse at her position in the Brown family. She was Cody Brown's second wife, the one that paved the way for what would eventually become a four-wife household, televised for millions to watch on Sister Wives. Throughout the series, Janelle developed a reputation as the quiet, steady hand, the one that frequently offered balance when emotions are running at an all-time high. Unlike some of her sister wives, she has never hesitated to speak of her frustrations, her doubts, and the unvarnished truth about the difficult aspects of polygamy. She's also been swift to warn people that this life is not for everyone. The emotional burden, the monetary pressure, the complicated timelines, none of those are simple. Which is why her assumption that making polygamy legal would make men reconsider the whole endeavor has some substance. Her reasoning is simple. Once the law gets involved, the fantasy ends. Legal recognition would bring with it taxes, custody issues, inheritance disputes, and the cold, hard realities of paperwork. And let's be honest, most men aren't daydreaming about IRS forms when they picture plural marriage. The legal side of polygamy today, in the United States of America, polygamy is prohibited. Only monogamous marriages are legally recognized, and although some religious communities continue to practice plural marriage in their own manner, those marriages lack legal status. Because of that, polygamy often carries a forbidden or fringe image in the public eye. Janelle's point adds an interesting twist. If the law did recognize it, men might suddenly see the true weight of what they're signing up for. The extra obligations could make the lifestyle feel a lot less like a fantasy, and a lot more like a burden. The emotional toll, and let's not forget about the emotional aspect. None of that is a cakewalk either. Janelle has discussed at length how exhausting it is to deal with not one marriage, but several at the same time, attempting to keep peace among co-wives, navigating rivalries, managing misunderstandings. It's challenging enough in one relationship, much less multiple under the same roof. And when it's legal and binding, the stakes become even higher. Divorce, custody, public opinion, all of it adds additional pressure. As Janelle describes, the fantasy of multiple wives tends to come crashing down when it hits against the reality of dishes, emotional labor, and everyday family stress. How people reacted, of course. Her remarks provoked responses everywhere. Social media, fan forums, even the news. Some complimented her on being so frank, praising it as refreshing to hear someone lay bare the staged picture of polygamy. Others countered that the opposite would be true, that legalization would somehow make the practice more desirable. But here's the secret, Janelle isn't anti-polygamy. She's experienced it, and she knows both the beauty and the heartache that are involved. She treasures the shared duties, the companionship, and the special family ties. Meanwhile, she doesn't deny the difficulties. And for that reason, so many fans admire her outlook. Janelle versus Cody, different lenses on polygamy naturally. In order to completely comprehend her perspective, we must also examine her husband, Cody Brown. He's been the public face of the family's narrative from the very beginning, and his opinions are informed almost entirely by his religion and principles. Cody tends to talk about polygamy in near religious terms, portraying it as a way of love, of oneness, and of mutual purpose. He emphasizes the camaraderie, the emotional support, and the vision of one large family moving together toward the same objectives. Janelle, meanwhile, counterbalances that with pragmatism. She's gone through the practical headaches and the emotional toll, so her eye is usually more realistic, perhaps even wary. And it's in that tension between Cody's idealism and Janelle's earthy realism that her latest commentary is so plausible. Cody's vision versus reality. Cody Brown frequently discusses polygamy as though it's a skillfully calibrated system of relationships, a system that, when done correctly, can deliver love, friendship, and special dividends. He maintains it's not about power or convenience, but creating something with substance. But let's be real, Cody's optimistic dream doesn't always align with reality. While he encourages legal and social acceptance of polygamy, the heavy lifting of everyday life, coordinating multiple households, calming arguments, and fulfilling everyone's emotional requirements, frequently doesn't land equally across the family. And that's precisely where Janelle's point resonates. She thinks men such as Cody sometimes underestimate the hard work it really does require. And if the law came into it, taking away the flexibility of private arrangements and imposing legal requirements and publicity, then many men would be swamped rather than enabled. The co-wives' thoughts. Janelle is not alone in having a reflective view about polygamy. Her sister wives, Mary, Christine, and Robin, all have their own story and perspective. Mary Brown has been vocal about her struggles in a plural marriage. She's been open about feelings of neglect and frustration, particularly in her marriage with Cody. She's highlighted the way painful it is when one husband's attention is divided in too many directions. If polygamy were legal, those inequalities might not just persist, they'd become more formalized, more inescapable. Christine Brown tends to focus on commitment and faith in describing how she practices polygamy. She usually describes it as disciplined and ordered, based on loyalty. Even so, even Christine acknowledges that the daily mechanics are hard work. Put law enforcement pressures on top, such as money, child custody, or access to property, and the stress quickly outpaces the idealism. Robin Brown, the youngest of the wives, has traditionally served as the family organizer and peacemaker. She arranges many of the behind-the-scenes logistics that keep the family operating smoothly. But even she shows an important truth. Polygamy is a constant negotiation and effort. If it were an entirely legal institution, those duties would weigh that much more heavily on men, potentially deterring men who aren't actually prepared to make the sacrifices involved. Together, the experiences of the wives corroborate Janelle's assertion. The dream of many partners is seldom equal to actuality. The bigger picture, polygamy in American culture. Polygamy has ever been a complex baggage in the United States. It intrigues some, appalls others, and causes endless controversy. Polygamy historically has hung around religious communities, especially those that have been considered suspect or even hostile to mainstream society. Legislation prohibiting it has served to reinforce the notion that monogamy is the sole valid basis for family life. Through the Browns' sister wives on TLC, the Browns became a sort of living laboratory case study, whether they meant to or not. Audiences witnessed the ups and downs, the hardships and the sacrifices. And that setting makes Janelle's statement all the more poignant. She's not speculating, she's talking out of experience and years of public examination. A brief history of polygamy in America. To appreciate the debate of the day, it is helpful to take a step back. During the 1800s, some early Mormon groups openly practiced polygamy as a spiritual principle. This brought significant conflict with the U.S. government, which resulted in crackdowns through law and national outrage. The LDS Church formally disavowed polygamy by 1890, although smaller fundamentalist groups still practiced the same in clandestinity. Throughout time, it stayed largely in the underground, isolated, frequently secret from mainstream culture. Polygamy was a symbol of patriarchal dominance or even social instability for many Americans. Anti-bigamy and plural marriage legislation proliferated, supporting the cultural supposition that monogamy formed the foundation of family life. Polygamy today, legal and social challenges in modern America. Polygamy still exists in a legal gray area. It's technically illegal everywhere, but enforcement is inconsistent. In some rural or religious communities, families quietly live in plural arrangements without legal recognition. Advocates for legalization often cite religious freedom, personal liberty, and family autonomy. Critics counter that it could worsen gender inequality, financial struggles, and open the door to exploitation. This is where Janelle's view brings a fresh spin. By positing that legalization could discourage men, she defies the general assumption that all men secretly desire multiple wives. Her point is straightforward. After adding in legal requirements, public pressures, and emotional demands, so-called privilege of polygamy rapidly turns into a high-risk commitment. The Browns as cultural ambassadors with sister wives, the Browns have lovely or not, become cultural ambassadors for contemporary polygamy. Millions of people see them navigate household management, splitting time, money, and chores among multiple households. Conflict resolution, refereeing quarrels, calming rivalries, and attempting to maintain harmony. Public scrutiny, acting out private family drama on national TV. Emotional labor, showering each spouse with love and attention, as well as staying grounded as an individual. Watching it all unfold makes it easy to see why Janelle believes legalization would frighten men away, instead of bringing them in. Polygamy in life isn't an imaginary thing, it's a challenging way of living that calls for devotion, tolerance, and continuous adaptation. The gender question: who gains, who bears the burden? One of the charges often brought against polygamy is that it benefits men at the expense of women, and in the past, that isn't entirely untrue. But Janelle's account makes it more complicated than that. She insists that though undoubtedly women bear significant burdens in polygamous marriage, men aren't without strain either. Maintaining multiple households, ensuring harmony between co-wives, and fulfilling legal requirements, it's a burden. Too big a burden, in fact, for a lot of men who may only ever get to see the fantasy aspect of plural marriage. Legal recognition, a double-edged sword. One of Janelle's strongest points is that if polygamy were legalized, it would not automatically make it more attractive for men. Far from it, actually. Legal recognition would mean rules, paperwork, and expectations, things many men might not have considered in their daydream version of plural marriage. Suddenly, it wouldn't just be about romance, or the idea of more love. It would come with lawyers, custody agreements, tax obligations, and public accountability. Not nearly as glamorous. This turns the conventional presumption on its head. We presume that legalization would legalize the practice and make it more accessible for men to adopt. Janelle defies that presumption, reminding us that the functional reality of marriage, any marriage, isn't necessarily as much fun as fantasy. Stigma still looms large. Even if the law were to change, society's condemnation wouldn't vanish overnight. In America, polygamy has been demonized for generations, enmeshed in ancient stereotypes, religious scandal, and sensationalized media depictions. Reality shows like Sister Wives have undoubtedly placed plural marriage in the limelight, but not always with a positive spin. The Browns live out their challenges under a microscope, their intimate decisions being watched by millions. Janelle appreciates this reality. She realizes that making polygamy legal might just open the door to more snooping from neighbors, the media, and the state. To her, the hypothetical fantasy of multiple wives would just become dull, after considering the judgment, the gossip, and the constant opinions of others. The reality versus the show. Reality television loves drama. With Sister Wives, the audience gets to watch the drama, the competition, and the huge emotional explosions. It's good television. But what you don't always get to watch are the constant day-to-day negotiating, the fatigue, the drudgery, or the emotional strain of maintaining so many relationships. Janelle's view is liberating in that it dispels the TV version and presents what it's actually like: the mechanics, the give and take, the midnight discussions, and the ongoing juggling act. By openly discussing those less sensational aspects, she gets her point across loud and clear. Legal recognition would only amplify those problems, not simplify them. A cultural experiment in real time. In many ways, the Brown family has been running a national experiment on what modern polygamy looks like. Their wins and their setbacks serve as a preview of what could happen if the US ever did legalize the practice. What we've learned from watching them is that plural marriage isn't just about desire. It demands patience, emotional maturity, and a whole lot of organizational skill. Janelle's caution is straightforward but effective. Men who believe plural marriage is merely about more love might soon be rapidly overwhelmed by reality. Anything but fantasy, it's a lifestyle that strains every aspect of an individual's character. The psychological burden on men. Janelle also highlights an oft-overlooked fact about polygamy: the strain it puts on the men themselves. Even Cody, with his eternal optimist nature and robust public persona, can't help but feel the stress. Men in multi-wife families have some special challenges, such as decision fatigue. Try managing the schedules, budgets, and requirements of not one household but multiple. The constant decisions would exhaust even the most resilient willpower. Conflict negotiation. Co-wives don't always see eye to eye, and men are frequently referees. It's difficult to handle disagreements with equanimity and tact, and errors can evoke guilt and resentment. Social judgment. For the Browns, real TV blows every step into gigantic proportions. But even in private, men in multiple marriages are open to judgment by neighbors, extended family, and society at large. Relationship strain. Dividing time and emotional energy between multiple spouses can stretch a man thin. Deep, meaningful bonds are harder to maintain when you're constantly splitting your attention. For Janelle, the takeaway is clear. Legal recognition would make all of this even heavier. More obligations, more accountability, more stress. The emotional weight on women. The wives have burdens as well, of course. Janelle, who has lived it all for decades, knows firsthand just how complicated the emotional landscape can be. For women, some of the biggest challenges tend to be competition and jealousy. Even during the best times, living with a shared husband is emotionally complicated. Feelings of insecurity or neglect are difficult to avoid. Inequitable attention. Time is limited, and when a husband is overextended, it's simple for one wife to feel neglected. Public criticism. Polygamous women receive a unique kind of criticism. Stereotypes about weakness, morality, or self-worth that bite deeply. Emotional labor. Aside from raising children and managing households, women usually bear the emotional burden of keeping the family bound. Scheduling, taming disagreements, and keeping everything intact weighs heavily on their shoulders. Polygamy at the crossroads of tradition and modernity. At its essence, the battle over polygamy is not so much about family, it's about values. Historically, plural marriage was based on religious and cultural tradition. Today in America, it clashes with contemporary visions of gender equality, individuality, and personal freedom. The Browns' very public tale provides us with a prism through which to examine these tensions. And Janelle's observation that legalizing it would actually discourage men, not empower them, is an interesting twist. It implies that much of what we think about polygamy isn't true when you examine the lived realities. In earlier days, communities such as the early Latter-day Saints and certain contemporary fundamentalist groups viewed plural marriage as a religious calling, even a moral obligation. But in the contemporary world, those old-fashioned customs clash head-on with contemporary values, gender equity, individual independence, and the assumption of one spouse, legally and socially. The Browns, in a sense, sit at the very crossroads of this conflict. They've attempted to combine some traditional values with contemporary living, and through that perspective, Janelle's words have real authority. The concept of having several spouses may seem tempting in principle, half remembered as a sort of old-fashioned romantic fantasy. But as Janelle explains, in reality, under contemporary legislation, financial pressures, and emotional requirements, things are very different. That brings us immediately to the moral issues that people discuss when polygamy is mentioned. Aside from the question of whether it's legal, there are issues regarding equity, genuine consent, and issues of power. Critics are concerned that women might never be entirely free to choose this way of life, or at the very least, that there may be possibility of imbalance, or even force. Now, in the Browns' case, their relationships have been consensual and subject to mutual agreement. But if polygamy were legalized on a larger basis, the system would certainly be challenged in cases where not everyone entered with open eyes regarding what such a life actually entails. Janelle, with her decades of experience, goes straight to the point. Polygamy only succeeds if there's respect, open communication, and an honest effort to treat all people the same. Legal recognition, she says, might put a more intense spotlight on where that equilibrium isn't achieved, so families are left more open to conflict or investigation. Public opinion about this has always been split. On one hand, there are those who are arguing out of a commitment to freedom that adults must be free to organize their families as they wish. On the other hand, are those concerned that it might hurt women and children, perpetuating ancient patriarchal habits, or empowering exploitation. Janelle's view doesn't neatly fit into either category. She's not asserting that polygamy is a road to freedom, or necessarily asserting that it's oppressively wrong. Rather, she's observing the functional reality. It just isn't simple. Indeed, legalizing it would probably make it even more complicated. And this is where media is so influential. Television and documentary work and social media define a lot of what the public knows and thinks about plural marriage. The Browns' own lives have been dramatized themselves, conflicts and jealousies exaggerated for entertainment purposes. To the world at large, it can appear scandalous or curiously glamorous. But Janelle acts as a sort of check on those accounts. She insists on foregrounding the ordinary bits, the constant wrangling, the emotional work, the financial acrobatics, that don't always provide spectacular television, but constitute the actual experience. She contends that if polygamy were a legal option, those ordinary realities would become clearer. No more keeping up appearances behind selective depictions. The entire truth of the lifestyle would be revealed. And that truth, she guesses, could cause many men to reconsider leaping into plural marriage. Taking the larger context into account, making polygamy legal would not only alter the lives of single families, it would cascade through society. Courts would need to deal with custody fights and inheritance issues involving multiple wives. Welfare, healthcare, and tax systems would have to adapt to accommodate more complex household structures. Even our cultural definition of family could be tested. In that sense, Janelle's caution isn't simply personal, it's societal. She's reminding us that this is not just a different flavor of monogamy, it's an entirely different framework, with consequences that reach far beyond the home. The Brown's tale teaches us several things to take seriously. Transparency and open discussion are completely paramount. Emotional labor is not an afterthought, it's at the forefront. Patience and negotiation are daily necessities, not sporadic obstacles. And above all, the fantasy is not the reality. Television can feature romance or drama, but the actual life of plural marriage is much heavier, more complex, and oftentimes draining. That's why Janelle's quote is so powerful. She's not necessarily condemning polygamy, nor is she downplaying the happiness it brings to certain families. She's actually pulling back the curtain. She's asking us all to look at it not as some abstract concept, but as an actual way of life, one that takes honesty, grit, and tremendous commitment. Her words eventually lead us to wonder if individuals really comprehended the requirements of plural marriage. Would legalization lead more families to give it a try? Or would it, as she proposes, cause many to take a step back and reconsider? If ever polygamy was legalized in the United States, the aftershocks would be intriguing and complex. Let's hypothesize a few possibilities. First, you'd likely see wealthier men as the ones most able to adopt the lifestyle. After all, supporting multiple households, raising children across them, and managing all the legal responsibilities takes money, lots of it. This could create an economic divide, where polygamy becomes less about religious conviction or personal choice, and more about financial privilege. In other words, only the wealthy could realistically pull it off, leaving middle and working class families at a disadvantage. Second, the gender dynamics would change. Legal recognition, on the one hand, might empower women by providing them with more defined rights, where property, inheritance, and divorce are concerned.
That would be an improvement on the informal arrangements of the past, for sure. On the other hand, it could make the emotional balancing act of co-wife relationships even fiercer. Men in turn would be under new pressure to manage time, attention, and equity among several households. Janelle believes that these extra burdens would probably discourage many men who have previously believed that polygamy sounded easy or beneficial. Third, family arrangements themselves could become more institutionalized. With legal recognition comes regulation, prescriptions regarding childcare, partitioning of domestic responsibilities, and even legal tests for justice between spouses. Although that sort of structure could promote fairness, it could also eliminate some of the flexibility that families now negotiate for themselves. And let's face it, the additional paperwork and legal supervision could equate to more stress for all concerned. Fourth, public opinion hangs in the balance. Legalization would bring polygamy further into the mainstream, but that added exposure could bring even more media attention.
Family conflicts that previously remained behind closed doors could suddenly make front-page headlines. For famous families such as the Browns, who already exist under the scrutiny of reality TV, legalization may actually add to problems rather than make them easier to resolve. Now, even if you never indulged in polygamy, and let's be honest, most Americans won't, there are takeaways here for any family. Communication, for instance, is not optional. Whether you have one relationship going on or more, open and constant communication is what prevents things from simmering over. Unended battles can ruin a family in no time, while truthful speech engenders trust. Equity counts too. Not only financial equity, but the emotional sort. Family is what makes sharing duties and standing in for each other on a fair basis possible. Forget that balance, and fissures develop quickly. And there's also the reality check between fantasy and reality. Relationships are mythologized in the media to be glamorous or perpetually exciting. But married people know better. It's not candlelit dinners and grand romantic speeches all the time. Real life consists of bills, schedules, health crises, and daily compromises. Times 3 or 4 marriages. And you realize why Janelle practices realism over idealism. And lastly, legal awareness. Knowing the legal aspect of family life, property rights, custody disputes, inheritance isn't only for polygamous households. It's important for everyone. Forethought and a familiarity with the law can avoid heartache in the future. The Browns' family story, in many ways, has functioned like a social experiment. They've shown us what happens when plural marriage meets the modern world. Their ups and downs, their successes and struggles, give us a window into what polygamy really looks like in practice. Not the fantasy version, but the lived reality. And Janelle's perspective shines a light on that reality. For her, plural marriage is not necessarily easier or more satisfying than monogamy. If anything, it is harder, more work, more negotiation, and more emotional effort. Legal recognition, she cautions, wouldn't ease those demands. It would increase them. And it's here that the media come in particularly useful. Reality shows such as Sister Wives are compelling to watch, but they rely heavily on tension, drama, and huge emotional scenes. They gloss over the dull, everyday drudgery of juggling multiple marriages. Janelle prompts us not to forget that what keeps plural marriages alive is not the show. It's the unseen effort, the patience, the accommodation, the balancing act, day in and day out. Legal acknowledgement, in some respects, would put those private challenges right where everyone could see them. And that, she imagines, might cause a great many people, particularly men who viewed polygamy as a benefit, to reconsider.